It looks like people are starting to join us. Just a quick note. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We will begin promptly at 2 p.m. In the meantime, feel free to let us know where you're joining us from in the chat. All right, it is 2 o'clock on the dot Eastern Time. So we'll go ahead and get started. First, I want to thank everyone for coming to our latest online learning session, Congress and the Administration in the First 100 Days, What That Means for Private Forest Landowners. I am your host, Michelle Kane. I am Director of Communications for FLA. And today we'll hear from Craig Anderson, Vice President of Government Affairs with FLA, as well as Katie Moss, Director of Stewardship Initiatives and Regulatory Affairs for FLA. But before we dive in, there's just a few housekeeping items. Do note that your microphone is muted, so if you have any questions, you will be able to contact Craig or Katie with their information at the end of the session. Additionally, this session is being recorded, and we will send the full recording to you via email later this week. So with that, I will go ahead and pass off to Craig Anderson, our VP of Government Affairs. Craig?
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for making the time before the Memorial Day weekend to listen in to some of the recent actions by President Trump's second administration, as well as the 119th session of Congress. We've been on the ground in Washington, D.C. and across the country, meeting with agencies, working with Congress, and building coalitions, all to advance policies that give landowners the certainty they need. And this certainty is needed to keep their forest healthy, productive, and resilient. So before I dive into our policy areas, wanted to give a good kind of overview of the political landscape in Washington, D.C. And for those that are keeping up, there is a Republican trifecta of control where Republicans maintain both the White House, House, and Senate. And so with that, there's certainly opportunities for significant policy development. But, we're staying very focused when it comes to the policy work we're doing. However, we are making sure that we are strategizing to reflect the current leadership in both chambers, as well as in the White House. And so while our policy work does remain bipartisan and our relationships remain bipartisan, we do want to make sure that we are hitting all the targets that help make things move and shake. So again, when it comes to our policy priorities, we have essentially 4 different buckets. And these 4 core policy priorities, disaster recovery, market opportunities, private property rights, and tax certainty, each provide the certainty that landowners need to operate, invest, and keep their working forest in operation. Without that certainty, the long-term stewardship our members are committed to simply isn't sustainable. And the economic and environmental benefits we all depend on are put at risk. So let's first take a look at disaster recovery. So there is no silver bullet when it comes to disaster recovery. And that's why the Forest Landowner Association has been supporting a multi-pronged approach when it comes to recovering from any of these natural disasters, be it wildfires, hurricanes, high winds, frost, disease, pest, you name it. And so for us, the first step is correcting the tax code. And the Disaster Reforestation Act is a bill, I believe it's in its 4th session of Congress, that really gets at the crux of the issue when it comes to recognizing the basis of the land, as well as the timber that's lost from multi-generational family businesses. But in addition to that, we need to improve what already exists. And while landowners do not have as many of those programs and benefits that their counterparts in agriculture do have, there are programs like the Emergency Forest Restoration Program that we have made significant strides in improving. Last Congress, when Congress was divided with a Republican House and Democrat Senate, we did secure a provision in both versions of the Farm Bill that would make significant improvements to EFRP, namely providing 75% of those funds up front. And while the Farm Bill has not had much traction this year, and we'll get into that later, we do fully expect that we will see this provision included as well. And finally, that kind of third leg of the approach to disaster recovery, that comes to disaster relief funds and block grants. And certainly since Hurricane Helene's devastation last year, we were in the forefront leading a coalition effort with our national partners to Congress. We're very glad that they swiftly passed that supplemental appropriations bill for disaster relief. And we also supported an effort this year led by members of Congress from those impacted states to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, urging them to expedite both those direct payments and those state administered block grants. And we were very thrilled that landowners are eligible for those direct payments, and certainly look forward to the progress the agency and Secretary Rollins' team will have on expediting those funds to those that were impacted. So in addition to disaster recovery, market opportunities are certainly important. Landowners can't grow or sustain their operations if there's no market to sell their products. And that's why expanding and defending market opportunities is essential to FLA's advocacy approach. So what comes with that? Certainly supporting both traditional forest products markets, but also emerging sectors. And that includes biomass, carbon, mass timber, sustainable aviation fuel. We're looking at all of it, and we're certainly open to all of it when it comes to taking full advantage of the opportunities to derive revenue from your land. So on the federal level, we're working with partners on certain legislative initiatives. One of them is the Mass Timber and Federal Buildings Act. That certainly would unlock a key opportunity when it comes to the federal government building new facilities and making sure that we're utilizing a domestic source of wood. In addition, we're backing efforts to support and strengthen the Lacey Act to ensure that any imports of wood meet the same standards as our domestic source, in addition to leveling the playing field and defending our landowners against illegal timber imports that distort the global markets. So supporting these initiatives to unlock the potential of woody biomass, certainly something that we've had a lot of conversations on, both with partner organizations as well as with Congress and this new administration. And just as importantly, we've been pushing back against flawed international policies that are creeping into the United States, namely the European Union deforestation regulation, which wrongly penalizes America's green standard when it comes to forest management on a one-size-fits-all, which we certainly don't agree with. And we're glad that both Congress and the administration, along with our partners, all are on the same page with making sure that it is a workable solution in its final form when that comes out later this year. And at the end of the day, when it comes to any sort of trade barrier, be it tariffs or market distortions, we are certainly working for you to make sure that we have a level playing field so you can get your wood and your products out in the market so that you can continue to have a sustainable operation. So next, we're going to talk about private property rights. And for FLA, this has really been a core issue for years, certainly even before my time. Making sure that we support private property rights is the foundation for economic success for private forest landowners. Our members manage millions of acres and they plant more trees than they harvest. So ensuring a reliable domestic timber supply that fuels rural economies and supports U.S. manufacturing, but without tying the hands of our landowners that already have best management practices. And so, what Congress has been working on recently, certainly the Congressional Review Act, in a new administration, uh, there's always the opportunity for Congress to look back at the last administration for any rules or regulations that were promulgated that they have concerns with. Congress has passed more than 8 of these CRAs, and very few of them do impact landowners, but it is something that we do monitor, as there have been several in the past with significant support, namely for species listings with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, definition of habitat, as well as the definition of waters of the U.S. at the EPA. In addition to Congressional Review Acts, we're very proud to support a bill by Chairman Westerman of the House Natural Resources Committee called the Endangered Species Act Amendments Act of 2025. And this is just a much needed modernization of the ESA that's preserving its conservation mission while clarifying protections for landowners. This is all about fairness, clarity, and ensuring that working lands can stay in production while still protecting wildlife and the other environmental benefits that they provide. And lastly, one of the most important policy priorities for us comes to tax certainty. Family forest businesses need that certainty in the tax code to weather economic disruptions, withstand natural disasters, and continue to deliver those economic and environmental benefits our nation depends on. So we've worked with several coalitions, as well as independently, on certain provisions when it comes to the tax code. With the Family Business Coalition, a big priority for us has been the Death Tax Repeal Act. As most of you know, the death tax is also called the estate tax, and that certainly has hindered a lot of multi-generational businesses. And so working to make sure that we can, at the very least, continue to raise that exemption, if not completely get rid of the estate tax as a whole for these family forestry businesses. In addition, as we covered in disaster recovery tools, correcting the tax code, making sure that timber that's been destroyed by federally designated natural disasters can be deducted from your taxes. There are very few assets in this country that have this problem. It's a very niche issue, but one that we're very glad has gotten significant bipartisan support, but also support from a lot of different associations. I think now we're up to over 95 organizations that support that bill. So certainly optimistic looking forward to which package we could get that put into, or how we can get Congress to act on it. And finally, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. That's certainly been a big driver for both Congress and President Trump, as this was certainly one of his big achievements from his first term in office. And so for us, certain provisions that really matter, of course, the estate tax, like I previously mentioned, bonus depreciation, Section 179 expensing, and the Section 199A deduction. So lots of big key provisions that are in the mix, and ones that provide a lot of that certainty for small family businesses that are in forestry. Making sure that you're able to reinvest in your land is a key part of this, and very foundational to the health and future of working forest. So next, I want to cover some of the key congressional developments. You'll notice it's a short list. That's because a lot of the action has actually been on the regulatory side. And, this is pretty typical, especially for a new session of Congress, but especially one that is tied to a new presidential administration. Because the first priority is you have to get all of the leaders of these agencies confirmed. And with the Senate's review and consent, as mandated by the Constitution. They certainly take the due diligence very seriously, vetting these officials, and certainly the ones that are more controversial eat up a lot more time. And FLA, both behind the scenes, but also more publicly, we were very supportive of several of these nominees, and also very glad that the nominees that we were supporting were able to pass the Senate with significant bipartisan support, which certainly tells the tale that these essential agencies that forest landowners work with and rural America works with, that there's significant bipartisan support for their mission and the work that they do. And it took up until March 11th for the last member of the cabinet, who is Secretary Lori Chavez DeRimmer of the Department of Labor, to be confirmed. So that ate up a ton of time, in addition to the clock ticking, being able to act with the Congressional Review Act, reviewing some of those rules and regulations that need to be repealed or trying to repeal them. Couple that with making sure that federal government doesn't run out of money. In March, they were able to pass a continuing resolution. Continuing resolution means that it is the last statutory limits for government funding, and that is through the rest of the fiscal year, which ends at the end of September. And so, coupled with government funding is always the discussion around the debt limit, the debt ceiling, how much money the US government has to borrow. And so, looking forward, that certainly will be part of the discussion. So as we look ahead with what are potential opportunities, bills, policies that landowners should be interested in or will impact landowners. And the first, which is certainly on many people's minds, is budget reconciliation, also known as One Big Beautiful Bill Act. That passed the House this morning around 7 a.m., and it is due to come to the Senate with a lot of skepticism. Many senators have been quite vocal about wanting to make changes, but Speaker Johnson stuck to his timeline. He wanted to get this passed through the House before Memorial Day weekend, and the timeline is to potentially get this passed the Senate before July 4th holiday. So tight timeline. We'll see if the Senate is able to work with that schedule. They certainly have more structured rules than the House when it comes to being able to consider large pieces of legislation like that. And given that it is budget reconciliation, this will be a partisan process, just like in past sessions of Congress with the Inflation Reduction Act, Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. This is something that I would not expect Democrats to cross the aisle and be helpful with. However, when it comes to two other important legislative opportunities, both the Fix Our Forest Act and the Farm Bill, we do expect and certainly do hope that there will be the traditional bipartisan support. Fix Our Forest Act already passed the House pretty early this year and would be a significant step when it comes to being able to better manage our public lands, thus creating safer neighbors for private forest landowners. And this is something that the Senate is already making changes to, which means that it would come back to the House for a vote. And when it comes to Fix Our Forest, it sailed through with bipartisan support in the House, and certainly expect it to do it again in the Senate, as well as when it returns to the House before going to the president's desk. And finally, the Farm Bill. This is one of the largest pieces of legislation that's routinely worked on. It's an omnibus bill that really handles a lot of rural policies, but also nutrition policies as well. And typically, it is a 5-year reauthorization. However, given difficulties with the split Congress last year, it did not pass. And so we've actually been operating under an extension of the 2018 Farm Bill. So it has certainly been a while, but there's optimism coming from Chairman Thompson of the House Agriculture Committee that once the budget reconciliation process with the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, once that is concluded, that they will quickly mark up within their respective committees the Farm Bill. We're certainly optimistic about that. All of these bills, we certainly have provisions that we are advocating for, and optimistic that landowners will be front and center when it comes to being able to have provisions that will further the certainty they need for their businesses. And now I'm going to kick it over to my colleague Katie to give us a little snapshot of the regulatory side and our interactions with these agencies.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. So just real quick before I kind of dive into the developments we've seen on the regulatory side in the first 100 days, did want to do a quick kind of orientation to our regulatory goals at FLA. So really our goal when we work with regulators is ensuring landowners' freedom of operation through the protection of your private property rights, which are secured through regulatory certainty that we can help achieve through proactive engagement with these regulators. So as Craig said, we've had a lot of all of the key cabinet appointments in the agencies that we work with, agriculture, interior, labor, commerce, the administrator of EPA. And then there have also been some key director level appointments. For example, Forest Service, NRCS, the Farm Service Agency, Director of Fish and Wildlife Service soon. So we're seeing a lot of these leadership positions start to shift, and the new folks coming in. The agencies at the same time are in a period of restructuring. So there's a lot of downsizing of personnel happening right now in the agencies. Federal spending and overall budgets for the agencies are being examined and reduced. And then there's just kind of an overall level of uncertainty that the agencies are experiencing right now with their operations. But we really believe that the most common sense programs that are the most beneficial to rural America will likely be what sticks long term. So we're working with the agencies right now on prioritization, really focusing on these landowner-centric programs that promote collaboration and keeping working lands working. So for the Trump administration, prioritizing deregulation in many of the areas that mean the most to landowners is key right now. So with executive orders, there have been a historic number of executive orders that President Trump has signed in his first 100 days, 142 of those. And there have been a few that really stick out for private landowners. So first is there were some executive orders repealing Biden era orders that impacted private landowners. So for example, some of those that increased focus on climate and on climate smart forestry. There was also an executive order called Unleashing Prosperity Through Deregulation that stated for every one new regulation proposed, 10 old regulations would be rescinded. So we will see how that gets implemented at the agency level going forward. And then really the main executive orders of interest to private landowners are the timber executive orders strengthening domestic timber supply. We really appreciate the administration prioritizing domestic timber in general. And it's just really great to have a president even talking about our industry, because it really opens up a lot of opportunity to further conversations about private forest landowners with the White House and agencies in Congress. And we know that private landowners provide more than 90% of the domestic wood supply for the forest products that our nation depends on. So any efforts to bolster domestic timber will rely on private landowners to achieve those goals. And really, we've been trying to weave this administrative priority into our engagement with the agencies, because we know that giving flexibility and assurances and disaster recovery tools to private landowners is what's going to help them really contribute to a strong domestic timber supply and reach the goals of these executive orders. There have also been secretarial orders and announcements of interest to private landowners. USDA has released orders to meet the goals of the Timber Executive Order, such as minimizing NEPA requirements, streamlining fire mitigation activities, and it does show that they are serious about answering the call of the administration, although it will likely be some time before management regimes on national forests across the U.S. significantly change. There was also a secretarial order from the Secretary of the Interior that included some important developments for private landowners. Namely, that order effectively repealed the blanket 4D rule, which we've talked at length about in the regulatory space, and also directed the Fish and Wildlife Service to review critical habitat designations to ensure that the economic impacts and any national security threats were properly considered. So we really appreciate the efforts of the Interior there. And then also EPA, Administrator Zeldin announced that they'll be reviewing and revising 31 environmental regulations. And so of interest to private landowners, Waters of the U.S. rule and the National Ambient Air Quality Standards are on that list. When it comes to the Federal Register and new proposals, things have been relatively quiet, which is what we expected at this point. But the proposals that have come out from the agencies we work with are really telling, I think, of the deregulatory nature of this administration and really show what's taking priority at the agencies as they do their own sort of internal analysis of the regulations that are impacting American citizens. Of note, EPA is working to better align WOTUS with the Second Supreme Court ruling. FLA did provide recommendations to EPA on how best to do that to give landowners the certainty and the flexibility that they need for their operations. And also, Fish and Wildlife Service recently proposed to rescind the definition of harm under the ESA to bring the statutory meaning of take more in line with the original intent of Congress. And we also provided comments on that proposal as well, which were highlighted in our most recent newsletter, if you want to give those a read. And really just as we kind of enter this post-Chevron regulatory landscape, returning to the original intent of Congress is what will guide the way for many of these regulatory developments that we're going to be seeing over the coming months and years. And so that really means that many of these environmental regulations that have been broadly interpreted and implemented by the agencies will likely be reined back, which we believe is likely to be beneficial for private landowners overall by cutting back on this regulatory overreach. But the long-term impacts of the repeal of Chevron still remain to be seen. So for both our regulatory and our legislative work, partnerships are really key to advance our priorities in all areas. They really help us amplify our voice on landowner issues and help us tackle larger issues on behalf of private forest landowners across the nation. So one partnership opportunity that I've had recently was I met with a really diverse group of stakeholders, folks from, landowner representatives from the forestry and ranching sectors, federal agency leadership, conservation organizations, academics. And it was a really great 2-day meeting to discuss collaborative approaches to conservation that keep working lands working. These are the kind of partnerships that we look for to help us find ways to create the right incentives and the right assurances that help private landowners conserve species and habitat on their property and still remain economically productive in this pretty turbulent time for markets and regulations both. And then we're also setting a lot of really great groundwork for increased collaboration and potential partnerships with the federal agencies. So as new leadership has been confirmed at these key agencies, we've been reaching out really to just let them know who we are and let them know some areas where we may be able to work together. So that's been a really great tool that we've used to get our foot in the door. And then Craig has also done a lot of really great work in DC to make connections with these agencies as well. So I'll turn it back over to Craig to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, Katie hit the nail on the head. When it comes to the work that we do, we certainly rely on making sure that we have partners from diverse backgrounds, whether they're in forestry, agriculture, business, conservation, or something completely different, that we lean on them when it comes to the policy work that we're doing, both on the regulatory and legislative side. And, right now, there are over 100 different groups that we do work with, not just on our policy priorities, but a lot of mutual policies that impact rural America, and interests that involve, the work that we're trying to propel. But, recently, outside of just our regular engagement with Congress, did go up to DC and had meetings at EPA, Forest Service, USDA, and even the White House. And all of them were very receptive to the issues that matter most to landowners, and certainly receptive to a lot of the priorities that we're trying to get across the finish line, both on the legislative and on the regulatory side. And so, as we kind of draw to a close with this webinar, really just want to challenge those of you that are tuning in that if you are interested in learning more about our partnership opportunities, if you have a suggestion for organizations, agencies, policymakers that we should meet with, collaborate with, partner with, we want to hear from you. But certainly want you to also feel comfortable with approaching us with different policy questions that you might have, either about our work with agencies or Congress, because we're here to be a resource. We're here to make sure that the economic and environmental future of your working forest will be stable. And so very proud to work and partner with all of you and represent you in Washington, D.C. and beyond. But our email addresses are here. If you ever need to get a hold of us, don't be shy. We're always happy to be a resource and a partner.
Thank you so much, both Craig and Katie. Don't hesitate to reach out, as they both said, if you have any additional questions or if you just want to know how to get involved a little bit more. They would love to help you. So appreciate all of you tuning in today, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.